Now then, welcome back to another one. In my many years of photography, I have shot pretty much everything, from cars to seascapes to street, but until just a couple of months ago, I've never shot infrared. For the longest time, I've appreciated infrared photography, more so the black and white than the false color thing. I mean, that's cool, but yeah, I do like the black and white, and that's what I'm going to be mainly talking about in this video. But yeah, I never took that next step into either buying a converted camera or filters or anything until I saw this converted Lumix G5 for just £71. So in this video, I want to talk about what infrared photography is and different ways to approach it, whether you go with a converted camera or with filters, and why I ultimately chose the camera. How I set up the G5 to get monochrome images like this, pretty much straight out of the camera with very little tweaking in post. And finally, how it can affect your compositions because of how certain elements interact or react to infrared light. Okay, so I'm going to keep this simple because I realized when researching this that this can get very sciencey very fast. So I'll throw some pictures on the screen to distract you while I talk about what is infrared photography. Now, humans can only see a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum, around 0.0035% to be precise. So digital cameras are designed to produce images using this visible light range. But camera sensors are actually sensitive to a much larger range than this, so they use blocking filters in front of the sensor to narrow that range down. Making sense so far? Good. An infrared converted camera like my G5 is just a regular G5, but inside the camera the infrared blocking filter has been removed from in front of the sensor and replaced with clear glass, thus allowing the camera to record both visible light and infrared. Now, there are other ways to convert a camera to see more of the spectrum, and these are full spectrum cameras, but I'm not going to get into that here. If you want to know more about that kind of thing, Rob Shea has an absolutely fantastic channel covering all things converted cameras, so I'll leave a link in the description to his channel. Alright, this is about as sciencey as I'm getting on just one cup of coffee, so let's get into why I ultimately bought the camera rather than the filters. There are actually two reasons why I decided to buy this camera: cost and flexibility. By using filters to create infrared images, you can use any camera to do it, but the trade-off here is that everything has to be a long exposure. Now, the reason for this is, for example, one of the filters I looked at was the Hoya R72 filter, which is a 72 nanometer infrared filter, but that means it only lets in light at 720 nanometers or above, which effectively makes it a 15-stop ND filter as well. So even on the brightest of days shooting with filters, you're going to need a tripod, and anything moving in the scene is going to obviously be blurred. With a converted camera, however, you don't have any of these issues. You don't have this drawback. You can use it like a regular camera, and if you want to get really weird, you can even use it for video. Now, going back to the other reason, the cost. When I was looking into the filters, the Hoya R72 filter for 77mm, that was coming in at £76. And like I said, this was only £71, £75 if you include postage, without any of the drawbacks. Now, when it comes to the look, bloody floorboard. Now, when it comes to the look of infrared images, I understand it's not for everyone, and I'm not really a big fan of the false color look, but I really like the black and white. So I want to show you how I set up the G5 so I can just literally pick up the camera and start shooting. Now, first of all, I've set the camera to RAW plus JPEG, because this gives me the best of both worlds. When I set the picture profile to monochrome, I get that look baked into the JPEG, but the RAW file isn't affected by the picture profile, so I get the full, glorious pinky red image. This allows for much heavier editing of the color channels if I choose to. In my monochrome profile, I've added contrast to +2 because there's infrared light bouncing all over practically everything, so you end up with a much flatter looking image. Sharpening is at -2, but that's nothing to do with it being infrared, and just because it's JPEGs in general. If you want sharper images, adding sharpening in post to taste is a much better option because, as I always say, you can't take sharpening away, so don't let the camera do it. These settings will be different depending on the camera you're using, but the principles remain the same, and that goes for metering too. I use whole scene metering to get a nice even exposure, or multi-metering. On Canon I think it's evaluative metering, and on Nikon I believe it's something like matrix metering, but it's all the same business. And depending on the scene, a different metering mode may work better for you, but this is just my grab and go settings. For focusing, I use AFS and flexible spot, and it's worked perfectly so far. And finally, I've mostly been shooting in aperture priority and at base ISO because the images are naturally quite bright and flat, and generally I'm using this in very sunny conditions, so the shutter speed is usually quite high. Alright, so now let's talk a bit about composition and how shooting infrared may influence this. Again, I'm talking about this in regards to the way I prefer to shoot, which is primarily in black and white. So if you prefer the false color thing, some of these things may not apply in terms of composition because things are going to look slightly different. And again, check out Rob's channel if that is more your thing. It's by far the best channel I've found on the internet regarding infrared and false color. Now, as you saw from the images I've already shown, the foliage appears white in the monochrome images, but the water often can appear black. Now this is because low sediment water absorbs almost all infrared within about the first 10 centimeters or 4 inches, giving that really dramatic contrast to the white trees. Now with salt water, the effect is slightly less pronounced because you have salt in there and sand and all kinds of other business sloshing around, allowing the infrared light to reflect off of it. So it often appears more like murky grey than black. Similarly, on a blue sky day with low atmospheric haze, those blue skies are going to appear quite deep grey to the infrared camera. And although you generally see infrared images making use of that white or pink foliage, don't be afraid to experiment. I found that using this in other situations I've shot on the street with it creates some quite alien and haunting effects. It's very, very cool. One final thing regarding composition, somebody when I first got this camera and I put a community post out said, with regards to lenses, wider the better. Completely agree, 100%. I put the Leica 9mm on there and some of the pictures, you've already seen some of the pictures, they just look fantastic that wide. And I think it's because it allows so much in there in terms of the scene. You get lots of contrasting elements and it's kind of like, it's almost like looking at a negative but not, it's so good. Definitely shoot wide. If you're into infrared photography and you want to start a conversation, leave a comment down below and tag me in your infrared images over on Instagram. And if you want more Micro Four Thirds goodness, check out this video next. Thanks for watching.